I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. I should have seen the signs earlier, but they say love blinds you. Looking back, I wonder how many moments I missed, how many times I trusted without question. For 10 years, Claire and I had built a life together. Our routines were synchronized to the minute, from early mornings with our kids to late nights spent catching up on our favorite shows. She was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: smart, driven, beautiful. It was a Saturday morning when the illusion shattered. I was making breakfast for our kids, juggling cereal bowls and orange juice, while Claire darted around, preparing for yet another work trip. She worked in marketing, so travel was just part of the job, or so I thought. Her trips were a minor inconvenience in our otherwise peaceful life, so I'd never questioned them. But this time, there was something different in the way she moved around the kitchen, some kind of nervous energy that unsettled me. "Don't forget to pick up the kids from soccer," she reminded me as she grabbed her keys. "Already on it," I replied with a smile, trying to lighten her mood. But she only offered a tense smile back. It wasn't like her to seem so distracted. Usually, she was relaxed, even playful, especially before leaving on a trip. "See you tomorrow night," she added, almost too quickly, barely making eye contact as she hurried out. I heard the door close, and then the house fell silent, save for the distant cartoons echoing from the living room. It was then that I noticed her phone lying on the kitchen counter. Claire never forgot her phone. In our entire marriage, I couldn't recall a single time she'd left without it. Before I knew what I was doing, I picked it up. Just a quick look, I told myself. I wasn't the type to snoop, but there was something about her behavior this morning that I couldn't shake. Her lock screen was off, open from when she had checked it earlier. I only had to swipe up. And then I saw it, the message that changed everything. From someone named Brad, a name I'd never heard her mention, though she often talked about her clients. His message was simple yet intimate: "Miss you already. Can't wait to see you tonight." I froze, the words sinking into me like lead. For a moment, I convinced myself that it could be innocent, that maybe it was a close colleague. But as I scrolled up, my worst suspicions were confirmed. The messages were intimate, personal in ways that no coworker would be. They spoke about nights they had shared, dinners, even inside jokes that had nothing to do with work. My stomach twisted. I felt like an intruder in my own life, like I had stumbled into a secret world that wasn't meant for me. I stood there, gripping her phone so hard my knuckles went white, wondering how I'd missed all of this. Claire and I shared everything, or at least, I thought we did. Suddenly, I was jolted back to reality by my son tugging at my shirt. "Dad, I spilled the juice," he said, looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. I forced a smile, setting Claire's phone down carefully on the counter as if it might explode. "Let me get that for you, buddy," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I cleaned up the juice, glancing back at the phone, now a ticking time bomb in the middle of our kitchen. The kids didn't notice anything was off, which I was grateful for. I didn't want to let them see what was building up inside of me. As soon as they were settled in front of the TV, I picked up the phone again and read more. Every line of text chipped away at the life I thought we had. They had been meeting regularly, under the guise of her work trips. She had used our trust as a cover, slipping off to be with him while I took care of our home and our children. I should have been angry, furious even. But what I felt was a deep, hollow sadness that seemed to drain the strength from my body. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, letting the reality sink in, the betrayal searing into me. A part of me wanted to confront her, to call her and demand answers. But another part knew that wouldn't be enough. Instead, I put the phone down, and a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't something I could fix with a confrontation. I needed to think carefully, to control my emotions, and plan my next move. I knew this wasn't going to end with a simple argument. If she had broken our trust so deeply, I needed to protect myself and my children from whatever fallout was coming. For the rest of the day, I played the role of the doting father, taking the kids to their soccer game, cheering them on, and keeping up appearances. No one could tell that the life I had cherished was crumbling beneath the surface. And with every forced smile, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't let her off easily. She thought she could keep this secret, that she could live a double life without consequence. But she was wrong. That night, the house was unbearably silent. With Claire gone, I was alone with my thoughts, replaying every moment, every decision, and every sign I'd missed. I couldn't shake the image of her phone screen, those words from Brad echoing in my mind. Part of me still couldn't believe it. This was Claire, the woman I'd trusted with everything, the mother of my children, my partner. But another part of me, a darker part one hadn't known existed, was already calculating, plotting my next move. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The plan came together slowly, bit by bit, as I thought about everything we'd built and how she had betrayed it. I knew confronting her right away would only lead to excuses, denials, and empty promises. She'd tell me what she thought I wanted to hear, maybe even shed a few tears to make me doubt what I already knew. No, that wouldn't be enough. I needed more than an apology. I needed her to understand the full weight of what she had done, and to feel the same devastation she'd inflicted on me. My first move was to secure everything that mattered to me and my children. If she thought she could run off with Brad and leave us behind, I'd make sure she left with nothing. The next morning, after I dropped the kids off at school, I called my lawyer. "Ben, I need your help," I said, my voice steady. I explained the situation without emotion, keeping it factual, clinical. Ben had been my lawyer for years, handling everything from our wills to our mortgage papers. I trusted him, and he didn't disappoint. "We can set up a separate account and move your personal funds over," he said. "This way, anything in the joint account remains untouched, but what's yours stays with you." "Perfect," I replied. "Let's get it done as soon as possible." He took a long pause before speaking again. "Are you sure you want to go down this road, James? Once you start, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied, without a trace of doubt. Claire had already crossed the line. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to come to her senses or beg for forgiveness. She'd had her chance, and she'd thrown it away. Now, I'd protect myself and my kids. By the end of the week, I'd moved most of our joint savings to a new account in my name alone. I left just enough in the joint account to keep up appearances, but everything important was under my control. I kept meticulous records, receipts, anything that could later prove how much I'd contributed to the marriage and our household. Claire wouldn't get a cent more than what was fair, and I'd make sure of it. In the meantime, I started collecting evidence of her affair. She thought she could hide behind her work trips, but I wasn't about to let that be her cover anymore. I went through her emails, carefully noting the dates of her trips and matching them with our credit card statements. Restaurant charges, hotel bills, flights to places she'd never mentioned before, all of it added up to a clear picture of her double life. It was strangely satisfying to gather these details, a reminder that I still had control, even as my world had been turned upside down. As I dug deeper, I uncovered more than I could have imagined. There were messages between her and Brad that went back almost a year. They'd shared holidays, weekends, even simple moments that she had never told me about. I learned about the inside jokes they shared, the pet names, the little notes they left each other in the margins of emails. Every word was a knife, cutting deeper, but I read it all, absorbing the pain like a man with a purpose. When she came back from her trip, I was ready. I'd planned every word, every look, every emotion I would allow myself to show. As soon as she walked through the door, I could see the guilt in her eyes. It was subtle, just a flicker of hesitation as she smiled and leaned in for a kiss. "How was the trip?" I asked casually, keeping my voice steady as I pulled away. "Oh, it was fine," she replied, her smile faltering slightly. She could sense something was different, but she wasn't sure what. I didn't give her any hints. I simply watched her, keeping my face impassive, as she set her bags down and tried to relax. We went through the motions of a normal evening, but there was a tension in the air that neither of us could ignore. She made small talk about her meetings, the usual business lingo that was meant to reassure me of her innocence. I nodded, playing along, but inside, I was already 3 steps ahead, watching for every crack in her story. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer. "Claire," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." Her face fell, a flicker of fear flashing across her eyes before she composed herself. "What about?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. I took a deep breath, meeting her gaze with unwavering intensity. "I know about Brad," I said simply. Her reaction was immediate. She froze, her face going pale as she stared at me, the words hanging in the air like a threat. I could see her mind racing, searching for a way out, but I didn't give her the chance. "I found the messages, Claire," I continued, my voice cold. "All of them. The trips, the dinners, everything." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see the guilt and shame pooling in her eyes, but it didn't soften me. I was done feeling sympathy for her. She had made her choice, and now she'd have to face the consequences. "I'm so sorry," she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "Sorry?" I repeated, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Is that all you have to say?" She looked away, the tears beginning to fall, but I didn't let up. "You betrayed me, Claire. You betrayed our family, our life, everything we built together. And for what? For some fling with a man who has no respect for what we've created." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands, but I didn't reach out to comfort her. This was her mess, and I wasn't about to let her off easy. I let the silence stretch between us, waiting for her to look at me again. When she finally did, her eyes were red and swollen, her expression one of raw vulnerability. "Please, James," she whispered, her voice thick with desperation. "Please, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain, Claire," I replied, my tone icy. "You made your choice. Now you're going to have to live with it." I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, her sobs echoing through the house. But I didn't feel any satisfaction. Just a hollow emptiness where my love for her had once been. She thought she could break our life apart and walk away without consequence, but she was wrong. I was ready to show her just how wrong she was. The days after our confrontation were eerily quiet. Claire walked around the house as though she were tiptoeing over shattered glass, as if one wrong step might make everything fall apart. I knew she was waiting for me to ask questions, to demand answers, to give her a chance to somehow justify what she'd done. But I didn't want justifications. I wanted her to sit with the weight of her betrayal, to feel its impact. Each night, she'd offer a soft apology, attempt to reach out, sometimes lingering at the door of our bedroom. I'd feel her gaze on me as if she could somehow read my thoughts, but I stayed firm. I didn't respond to her apologies, and I didn't give in to her attempts at conversation. I wanted her to live with the silence, to understand the chasm her actions had carved between us. And as for her affair, I had plans of my own. A week passed, and she finally broke down, begging me to sit down with her. It was a Sunday evening, and the kids were spending the night at my parents' house. Claire sat across from me, hands shaking, her eyes raw from the tears that never seemed to stop. "James, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she began, voice trembling. "But please, let me explain." I didn't move, didn't speak. I only watched her, letting the silence push her to continue. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was just a moment of weakness. And then, somehow, it turned into something more. I thought I could keep it from you, that it would fade away on its own. But Brad, he kept pushing, kept making me feel things I shouldn't have felt. I'm so sorry. Her words spilled out like a confession, a torrent of regret and misplaced guilt. But nothing she said mattered. Her explanations, her attempts to soften her betrayal, only solidified the depth of what she had destroyed. I can't believe you could throw everything away for him, I finally said, my voice calm, too calm. For someone who clearly never respected you or our marriage. What did he promise you, Claire? What could he give you that we didn't already have? She didn't answer, only looked down at her hands, her shoulders hunched, as if she were ashamed of herself. James, please. I know I made a terrible mistake. I know I hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. But I love you. I love our family. Please, let me prove to you that I can fix this, that we can get through this. The absurdity of her words made me laugh, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the room. Fix this? I repeated. Claire, you can't fix this. You can't undo what you've done, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. You've destroyed our life, our family, for a lie. You betrayed me. You betrayed our children. She flinched, her face crumbling as she buried it in her hands. But I didn't let her sorrow affect me. I was beyond feeling sorry for her. Do you realize what you've done, Claire? I asked, my tone unforgiving. Do you understand what this means for our kids, for our future? Do you really think they deserve to live in the wreckage of your decisions? Her sobs grew louder, but she didn't respond. Maybe there was no answer to give. Maybe she was only now beginning to understand the magnitude of her actions. But her tears didn't deter me. In fact, they fueled me. You thought you could keep it all a secret, didn't you? I continued, leaning forward. You thought I'd never know. But now you're left with nothing. Do you realize that? Brad isn't here, and he never will be. And you, Claire. You're going to have to face what you've done every single day. She looked up at me, her face pale, eyes full of desperation. Please, James, she whispered. Please don't take my family away from me. For the first time, I felt a spark of satisfaction. She was beginning to understand that her actions had consequences, that she couldn't just erase the damage she had caused. I won't take anything from you, Claire, I replied, my voice cold. You did this all by yourself. And now, you're going to live with it. After that night, she tried every angle, tears, promises, apologies, and even attempts at rekindling what we once had. She begged for counseling, pleaded to go to therapy, to rebuild the life she had broken. But I was unmoved. I had made up my mind. There would be no going back. Over the next few weeks, I finalized my preparations. I contacted my lawyer again, drafting divorce papers that left no room for negotiation. The custody of our kids would remain with me, the house, too, would be mine, a home for the children she had jeopardized with her recklessness. I made sure there were no loopholes, no compromises. This would be her punishment, her consequence. I could see her growing more desperate with every passing day, watching as her world slipped away from her grasp. She clung to me, sometimes even following me from room to room, as if hoping that her presence alone could sway me. But I remained firm, resolute. I couldn't allow myself to fall into her trap again, to let her soften me with the same promises she'd already broken. And then, one morning, she came to me with a proposal. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly together. James, she said softly, her voice wavering. I know you don't want to hear this, but, please, consider a separation instead of divorce. Just give me a chance to prove to you that I can change. I'll do whatever it takes. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her audacity. And what makes you think you deserve that chance, Claire? I don't deserve it, she replied, her voice thick with sorrow. I know I don't. But I'm willing to work for it, to do whatever you need me to do. For the kids, for our family. Please. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of doubt. The kids, their lives would inevitably be impacted by this decision, by the division of our home, by the loss of the stability we had once provided. But I knew I couldn't stay with her out of guilt, or for the sake of appearances. I needed to act in a way that would preserve my self-respect, my dignity. "You've already made your decision, Claire," I said finally. "And I've made mine." She fell silent, the last flicker of hope fading from her eyes. She seemed to realize, then, that there was nothing left to fight for, that the life she had so carelessly thrown away was now beyond her grasp. When I handed her the divorce papers, her hands trembled as she took them, her eyes filling with tears once more. She looked at me, pleading silently, but I had no sympathy left to give. This was the end of the life we had once shared, and there was no going back. As she signed her name on the dotted line, a strange sense of relief washed over me. I was free, from the lies, the betrayal, the pain she had inflicted on me. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I also knew that I was ready to move forward, to rebuild my life without her. When it was done, she looked up at me, her face etched with sorrow. "James. I'm so sorry," she whispered. But her apology meant nothing. It was just another word, empty and hollow, like everything else she had ever promised me. I turned away, leaving her sitting there, the finality of her actions settling around us both. As I walked away from her, from the house that held so many memories of a life we'd lost, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sorrow, and a quiet satisfaction. She had thought she could control the narrative, that she could escape the consequences. But in the end, she was left with nothing but regret, and I was free to build a life worth living. The chapter of my life with Claire had come to a close. And as I stepped out of the house, I knew I was ready to begin again, on my own terms, free from the weight of her betrayal. A year had passed since Claire and I signed the divorce papers, yet the memory of our marriage lingered in the corners of my mind, an unwanted shadow I couldn't quite shake. I threw myself into work, into raising the kids, doing everything I could to build a life without her. And for a time, it seemed to work. The pain dulled, the anger faded, and slowly, I began to find moments of peace in my new life. Claire was barely a part of our days now, seeing the kids only a couple of weekends a month. She'd moved into a small apartment across town, and from what I heard, she was still struggling to rebuild her life. Sometimes the kids would tell me stories of their weekends with her, stories that painted a picture of someone far removed from the woman I'd once loved. She'd grown quieter, more reserved, as if the spark that once made her so magnetic had burned out. One evening, I was at home, helping our daughter, Emma, with a science project, while Daniel worked on a math assignment. It was a quiet night, the kind that had become a new normal for us. The kids didn't ask about their mother much, and I never brought her up. In a way, it felt like she was a character from another story, a distant memory that we all preferred to keep at arm's length. The phone rang, interrupting the calm. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Claire's name. It was unusual for her to call during the week, and immediately, I felt a pang of worry. With a deep breath, I picked up. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, and then a voice, soft and tentative, like she was struggling to find the words. "James, it's me." "What's going on, Claire?" I asked, keeping my tone steady, though a part of me dreaded her answer. I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." A strange feeling washed over me, a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake. "What is it?" I replied, my grip tightening around the phone. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," she began, her voice breaking. "But I didn't know who else to call. I don't know how to say this, but I'm sick, James." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Sick?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "Yes," she replied, her voice cracking. It's cancer. Stage 4. I found out a few months ago. The world seemed to tilt beneath me as I processed her words. I didn't know what to say, how to react. This was the woman who had shattered my life, who had betrayed everything we'd built. And yet, hearing her say those words, a part of me felt an unexpected ache, a sadness I hadn't anticipated. How bad is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's not good, she replied, her tone resigned. The doctors say it's advanced. I didn't want to tell you. I thought I could handle it on my own. But I'm scared, James. For a moment, I was silent, grappling with a flood of emotions I hadn't felt in years. Anger, sadness, pity. She had hurt me, betrayed me in ways I thought I'd never forgive. But this was beyond anything I had prepared for. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't want the kids to find out from anyone else, she replied, her voice trembling. I need them to know, but I don't know how to tell them. I thought maybe we could do it together. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The last thing I wanted was to reopen the wounds she'd left in me, to let her back into our lives in any way. But I thought of our children, of how they would feel, and I knew I couldn't turn her away. No matter what had happened between us, she was still their mother, and they deserved to know the truth. I'll help you, I said finally, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. For them. A choked sob escaped her, and for the first time, I heard a vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. Thank you, James. I know I don't deserve it, but thank you. We agreed to tell the kids that weekend. She came over on Sunday afternoon, looking frail and thin, a shadow of the vibrant woman she had once been. When she walked through the door, the kids ran to her, hugging her tightly, and I saw a flicker of joy in her eyes that cut straight to my heart. We sat down in the living room, the four of us, and in a halting, shaky voice, Claire told them the truth. Emma clung to her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, while Daniel sat silently, his face pale and expressionless, as though he couldn't fully comprehend what was happening. I put an arm around him, pulling him close, feeling the weight of his sadness settle over both of us. For the next few months, we fell into a strange rhythm, one that blurred the lines between past and present, anger and forgiveness. Claire grew weaker, and I found myself stepping in more, helping with her appointments, arranging for the kids to spend time with her whenever they could. I didn't do it for her, but for our children, who deserved to have their mother in their lives, however briefly. One evening, as I was putting Emma to bed, she looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Daddy, is Mommy going to get better?" she asked, her voice filled with a hope that broke my heart. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my own emotions in check. "No, sweetheart," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But we're going to make sure she knows how much we love her, every single day." In the final days, Claire moved into a hospice, and I brought the kids to visit her every afternoon. Watching her fade away was painful, and yet, I found a strange sense of closure in those moments. She was no longer the woman who had betrayed me, but a mother, a person whose life was ending, and who needed kindness in her final days. The night she passed, I was there, sitting by her side as she took her last breath. Her hand was cold and frail in mine, but she managed a small smile, a flicker of gratitude in her fading eyes. "Thank you, James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For everything." I didn't respond, only nodded, my heart heavy with a sorrow that I hadn't anticipated. As I left the hospice that night, I looked up at the stars, feeling the weight of everything she had been and everything she had taken away. In the weeks that followed, I tried to help the kids make sense of their loss, to be the strong father they needed. But when I was alone, the sadness would creep in, a quiet, aching grief that settled into the corners of my life. Claire had left me long before she'd passed, but her absence was now final, irrevocable. And in that emptiness, I realized that forgiveness, true forgiveness, had come too late for us to mend what was broken, too late for me to tell her that, in the end, I had found it in me to let go of the anger. She was gone, a memory now, and all that remained were the pieces of a life we had once built together. It was an ending I hadn't expected, a sadness that cut deeper than I thought possible. I had lost her twice, in two very different ways. And as the days passed, I learned to carry that loss, to accept that some things could never be fixed, that some endings held a pain that would linger long after the story had ended.